I believe that creativity is a powerful vehicle to live more authentically and more fulfilled lives because by its very nature, it leads us to listen to our own inner authentic voice and our own feelings. And so many people are out of touch with that nowadays, especially with the technology and the screens in your face all the time.
Welcome to Soul-Led Creative Women, a podcast for creatively curious women seeking rich, soul-led ways to look after themselves better. I'm Sam Horton, and in this episode, I'm talking with Jenny Leigh Hodgins, a compassionate caregiver, seasoned musician, and dedicated advocate for creativity and empowerment. Our conversation is all about tapping into creative flow and embracing your authentic expression. Jenny Leigh shares with us her own creative exploration formula and offers us a poetry reading from her new book, Kaleidescope of the Heart. Enjoy. So today I have Jenny Leigh Hodgins with me. Jenny Leigh is the founder of Your Creative Chord, where creativity and inspiration meet transformation. Drawing from her multifaceted background as a musician, composer, educator, author, poet, and caregiver, Jenny Leigh infuses her work with a unique blend of passion and introspection. Her poetry and lyrics reflect the human experience, touching on themes of love, loss, cultural identity, building a solid inner core, and the spiritual essence of nature. Her work embraces a holistic approach, recognizing that our creative, spiritual, emotional, and physical selves are intertwined. She believes that we empower our innate creative potential and feed our wellness through interconnected aspects of life. Jenny Leigh is also a published author and the host of Your Creative Chord podcast, and she lives in Kentucky, United States. So welcome, Jenny Leigh.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to meet with you. Almost personally.
Yeah, good to be having this conversation.
Wonderful.
So before we jump into it, today we're going to be talking about tapping into creative flow as a means for embracing authentic expression. Just to give a bit of context to the overall theme of our conversation. And we actually have a very similar outlook and central theme in our work, Jenny Leigh.
Yes.
We both believe creativity is a path to greater wellness and well-being. But this view, for me anyway, came at later in life. So have you always had this belief, or was there a turning point that led you down this path?
So funny that there's one more thing we have in common. No, I have not always carried that belief. I really had a pretty tumultuous, dysfunctional upbringing, with a lot of anger and substance abuse from various people in my family. So my early attempts at creativity really came out of just expressing anguish and dealing with overwhelming emotions, basically. And because of my family dynamics, I really never felt at ease really with my creativity when I was younger, but it was my refuge. It was basically my survival. And what my creativity looked like then was I played piano. Piano was my instrument for really connecting with my feelings until I started writing. So I did really hide within the music because I felt like I could express things without, like it was in code. They wouldn't really know what I was feeling because it was music. It was a different language. So I didn't in those days really equate creative expression with wellness at that stage of my life. And when I was 23, I began practicing as an SGI Buddhist. I've practiced Buddhism for 37 years. And it was really the Buddhist teachings and the warm SGI Buddhist community and the late president of our organization, Daisaku Ikeda, who was himself a poet, a nature photographer, a writer, an author of many books. They all taught me the importance of cultivating a poetic spirit and of valuing creativity. Through that practice, I learned about that. And especially President Ikeda, he talked about it's so important to develop a poetic spirit, like do things like admire the moon at night, sit with yourself, journal your feelings and thoughts. And he talked about the importance of when you look at art of any form your own authentic perspective to that instead of listening to what critics or other people or society tell you to think about it. So that, I've practiced for 37 years, so that's a huge part of the way I think. It's a deep philosophy that of part of my life. And so Buddhism really taught me through that practice and through changing my own personal growth through that practice. It taught me the value of creating value from my suffering.
Mm.
And concepts like turning poison into medicine, where you take even negative experiences, and those can be the source for creating something and creating value from that something. And so that's how I started to incrementally learn to deal with my struggles as a musician, as a songwriter, as a composer, and later as a poet and in songs and lyrics. And it kind of eventually, as I practiced Buddhism, it sort of guided me through this natural creative process. And my works started to lead to these themes in my music or my words about treasuring your life, treasuring life itself, finding hope in unexpected, ordinary places, developing resilience. So alongside my Buddhist practice, and this took, time and years and life experiences, and, taking time to journal and compose and write poetry and later blogs and books, that led me gradually to realize the empowerment that's within authentic expression. And then it was, through my years as a piano chorus and music teacher for 30 years and as a performer as a vocalist and pianist over many years, I learned how creativity positively impacts wellness through our connection through those, for me bringing that creativity to others, it taught me that creativity connects us to each other and it can heal both parties through that connection. And then, it sort of kind of over the years, my entire way of viewing the creative process shifted from just a way to cope, though it's still a way to cope
Yeah.
with overwhelming, negative feelings
Mhm.
or circumstances, to more a way to appreciate and tap into life's really profound beauty and meaning and to share it with others and help others feel that. And so all of this is now kind of how I understand. I refer to it as, on my brand, yourcreativecore.com, I call it creative self-care.
Yeah.
You're calling it creative wellness. I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
That it doesn't just lead to my well-being, but that because I'm taking care of my well-being through my creative self-care, that kind of ripples out to other people, in my environment. So
Yeah.
wrapping up, it was basically my Buddhist practice, life itself, learning, aging, and learning from aging.
Yeah.
And the ideals from my practice, my Buddhist practice, are culture, peace, and education. And so I really feel being creative and the practice of creativity encompasses all those goals. So I've come here through life experience and through a philosophy and growing, through that experience.
And would you say that that journey has just become a deeper experience as life has sort of unfolded? So, what may have been a way to escape, in the very beginning, actually becomes a really deep way to tune into your own sort of inner power and wisdom, so to speak. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and even more than tapping into myself, it becomes a way to expand my inner life to embrace and encompass empathy, not just suffering in that, place, but being able to heal myself and through healing yourself, it expands a bit to, oh, now I can see, even if I don't agree or I can't live with, if it's a toxic scenario, whatever, I can still have empathy for that connection. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
and
definitely.
actually more love and grace in those situations
Yes.
aren't as positive. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very
Spot
powerful,
on.
isn't it? Yeah.
That's-
So do you believe then that we are all inherently creative beings, or do you believe that some of us have it and some of us don't?
That's such a good question. Because it totally reminds me of my years as a music and piano teacher. So many people using the phrase that I don't have any talent. That's hogwash. I'm just going to say it straight. I 100% believe that everybody has access to this unlimited fountain of creative flow in us. But I just think that those of us who are more in touch with it, who call ourselves artists or creative people, we just simply are more in touch with it, more readily able to reflect, sit still with ourselves, tune into it, but I do think that door for creativity is always open to
Mm,
anybody at any time, at any
mm,
stage, and it
yeah,
can be developed.
yeah,
I mean, I've
yeah.
taught like kids from ages 4 all the way to adults age 90 in
Mm,
terms of my piano and music
mm,
background. And so I fully know from experience, you can tell me you can't do creativity, but I'm telling you, you can, and I've seen you do it.
yeah, yeah. It's like the holy grail of growth mindset, isn't it? To witness,
Yeah.
from someone at the very beginning of a creative journey, as they've spent
Yeah.
time nurturing it, to
Yeah.
see how much they expand as a human and
Yeah.
their skill set, and
Yes.
so many rewards.
It really is amazing. And we all have that in us. And it's so inspiring, because we all do it differently too. So it's
Yeah,
just, yeah, it's a joy. Sorry.
yeah. Different things resonate with different people.
Definitely.
So, so why do you believe then that creativity is such a powerful vehicle for us to live more authentic and fulfilled lives? What is it about the creative journey?
That's such a good question. I I believe that creativity is a powerful vehicle to live more authentically and more fulfilled lives because by its very nature, it leads us to listen to our own inner authentic voice and our own feelings. And so many people are out of touch with that nowadays, especially with the technology and the screens in your face all the time. And I think by doing that very real process, it leads us to empathy, like I said earlier, about other people's feelings and voices. So there's a sense of harmony that comes from that kind of connection, and simply put, that lifts our spirits,
Mm,
you know?
yeah, it's very amazing. So, what do you believe holds people back from embracing their creativity?
Definitely that inner critic, the
Yeah.
negative, the negativity of our inner child's voice or
Mhm,
any damaged parts that we haven't yet healed ourselves,
mhm,
doubt, self-criticism, the inability to trust or to open ourselves to possibilities. And I think what brings people to embrace creativity is the opposite of those: trusting yourself,
mhm,
listening to yourself,
mhm,
embracing without judgment your perspective or your feelings in that moment,
mhm.
just just listening to them. You
Yeah.
don't have to analyze it or deal with it. Just listen to that, to your feelings. And I think that the more we can listen to ourselves and non-judgment and a proactive effort, make a proactive effort to trust that voice, the more readily you are to tap into the creative energy that's in you. It's ready
Mm,
to flow anytime. So, I just think listening to yourself, being still with yourself so you can actually hear yourself,
mhm,
and then no judgment, and then learn to trust that voice. I think that's
mm,
the key to that.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the work that I've been doing, even I'm finding that even if people have a desire to be creative, that there's like this deep limiting belief around the value in it, as in it's kind of a nice to have rather than being something that's essential for thriving in life. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, that's what we talk about the inner critic and the inner negativity being a block to creativity. Well, what you just described is the external critic. That's society. That's those external bars or standards that people, our cultural ingrained voices from society that are limiting our abilities. And that is a very large voice. It is a very powerful voice in our society. But I think it's I'm gonna sound very, very Kentuckian again. It's hogwash.
Mhm,
It's nonsense that you think that tapping into your own creative, voice or creative flow or creative output is less than something else.
mhm,
In fact, it can make such an impact in your personal fulfillment, your joy, your understanding and depth of understanding life and the meaning in life, which makes everything else, you know, easier to deal with, maybe flow a little better. It's all interconnected. And I think we're in this society where people are so disconnected
mm,
from that. They don't know what's good for them
mm,
anymore. And I think that's why it's so important. That's why artists people who are in touch with their artistry are, and like yourself, that offer, you know, some guidance on how to get yourself back on the creative path. That's why that's so important, because too many people have shut themselves off from it. And it really opens up joy. It opens up meaning. It opens up beauty and courage and compassion. So those things are critically essential in society. It's just a warped perspective that they're looking through, I think, when they're looking at it the way you described it earlier. And I think it's our job as creative people to help them awaken to that in themselves. It's therapeutic. It's healing.
Yeah, I'm starting to sort of form a belief myself that actually your self-care isn't comprehensive enough if you don't have creativity incorporated into it. What would you say to that? So for me, my self-care practice is my creative practice. My spiritual practice is my creative practice.
I see.
Do you feel the same about that?
I think it's kind of interchangeable in a sense, but let me put it this way. Like I said, earlier in my life, I didn't see my creativity as a part of my wellness.
Yeah.
So even though I gave many hours to playing and writing music, I was still suffering, personally. So I think...
is that because it wasn't deep enough, do you think? Or because you were still on the surface with your creativity, or because it lacked depth?
I don't think it lacked depth. It was full of deep emotion, but it was negative, anguish, suffering emotions.
Okay.
So, but I think what I'm getting at is there are plenty of creators like myself in my younger days who immerse themselves in creativity, but no good wellness thing comes out of that. Like you think about people that have been addicted to things or died young, and they created great things, but it wasn't great. So I think the type of creative self-care that at least that I understand that I'm trying to kind of convey in what I do is about, it's not just about being creative. It's about, it's kind of a two-edged sword there, because when you are able to tap into yourself and be creative, then you can reach a deeper understanding and a bigger, broader view and higher emotions, happier emotions, or, more valuable things. But not everybody can do that. There are plenty of creators that can't do that. So for me, creative self-care is...
it's a choice,
mix of things,
isn't it? It's a choice.
Yeah, it really is. And a practice, and a philosophy. I think and I think it really boils down to, we can make a greater impact on people, artists, especially people, and I call everybody's an artist, but when I say artists, like I said earlier, it's people that are in touch with that readily, and they embrace that mission as an artist, like yourself and myself. I think the key to creative self-care is to have artists who themselves are polishing their personal development, and whether they do it through their art, and you may be doing that within your... sounds like that's how you do your practice. That is not just about creative flow. It's a practice of self-polishing for you. And for me, my kind of foundation, or my anchor that I center myself on, is my Buddhist practice, my philosophy. And through that, I base my creativity on that, and my creativity is transformed because of that.
Sure.
And if it's all down to me, it's all down to intent.
Sure.
And like you said, the choice: are you intending to improve yourself or to improve other people? Then
it's actually more complex than maybe I give it credit, because my practice is a very holistic practice. So it involves some of the elements that I'm sure are included in your Buddhist practice.
Sounds very similar,
in terms of the grounding and intention setting.
Yes.
And then, making sure there's an exploration and play in there, as well as the actual physical act of painting or whatever, writing, or whatever it is that you're actually doing.
Yes.
It's not just about the painting. It's not just about the writing. There's a whole a sort of format that sits alongside that,
in a discovery process. Of yourself and your...
And like you said before, like the truest form of expression, I believe, is actually the power in sharing whatever you've created with the world. Like, it's one thing to express it and to create a painting or a poem, but it's another thing then to share that with the world and expose yourself.
Yes, that's courageous. Yes.
Yeah. It's
it does take some courage. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
So You have developed your own creative
Oh, yeah.
exploration formula designed to help people embrace their unique creativity, unlock creative flow. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Well, I had on my podcast, I did a creativity series, and I have these inspirational bookmarks that basically one of them has creative exploration formula kind of summarized on it. And then I have two others. And basically, I did that as a series of episodes because people kept asking me similar questions to what you're asking me, like, what's your creative process and how do you get creative? And so I just kind of, it was just a way for me, the creative exploration formula is just a way for me to kind of show them it's a mindset practice that I personally use, and that I've taught other people to use. And it helps you navigate your inevitable inner critic, set your ego aside, teaches you how to sit with yourself, to open your path to creativity. And so the gist of it is, excuse me, I think there's like 6 steps to it. I'll just go through them real quickly, like hyper speed. But basically, get inside your box. What that means is set parameters or limits, whether that's your time or your structure or the materials you're going to use, whatever. Just pick how you're going to do it and what you're going to use for it. Set some limits. And sometimes people freak out about this idea of setting limits, but I find that, of course, you can go the opposite, completely opposite extreme too. You can just go hog wild and have no limits, and that's a whole nother way to set your creative flow going. But in this particular one, when you set limits, it really does force your brain to think differently and find things that you would maybe not normally find. So if you normally set limits, then maybe don't do it if you want to tap some more creativity. But if you're just getting started, I highly recommend just set some basic parameters for yourself. And then the second part is let go of your head. That just means kick your ego to the curb. You don't need your editor hat on. You don't need your judgment on, just let it go. Nobody's judging you. Nobody sees this. It's just for you.
Mhm.
And then set your intent. And we were just talking about that is so important. And I think that's the crux, at least of the creative exploration formula, the way I do it. And it sounds like it's kind of the crux of your creative practice is setting your intent. And so for me, like in the way I explain it is, to me, that just means listen to your heart, really attuned to whatever you believe in, whatever you most care about, whatever it is you're working through or you're really focused on emotionally in your thoughts. And don't get attached to that. Just be the conduit for that. Let it just go through you and don't judge it. Just listen for it and kind of hone in on it. Focus on your intent and don't aim to control it. Don't listen to your judgment. Just let it go. So that's the, set your intent part. And that set your intent part for me of this whole formula is the through thread through everything. Like I always come back to that again and again and again through my whole creative process. And then the next part is visualize. And that's just going a little deeper, maybe, or with a little more detail, like you can do different things, imagining story, character, senses, color, texture, shapes, whatever, just deeply feel, deeply sense, and trust whatever that vision is, and just let yourself imagine it. That's the envision stage. And then the next step is exploring, and that's just take it further, brainstorm with it, explore it, experiment with it, follow your curiosity wherever it leads you, and don't question that. Just go there. Even if you've never done it, just on a whim, just go where it's leading you and don't question it. Explore, brainstorm, and then there's always, as part of the formula, allow room for failure, quote unquote failure. Just allow things to happen. Again, throwing the judgment out, because sometimes what we think might be failure or a mistake sometimes turns into, hello, innovation, like something new and fresh that we hadn't thought of before. So, I don't focus on ego or judgment or the inner critic, but I'm constantly saying, let go of it, because that will, constantly try to kind of creep in. That's why it's really important that you allow room for failure as part of that process. And again, the definition of failure, it might not be a failure. It might not be a mistake. It might be something that leads you down a new creative opening for something else. And then the last part of that creative exploration formula is what I call reiterate. which is just looking at your quote failures or mistakes or things that in your judgment critic voice didn't meet the bar. And instead of like judging it, just question how it happened,
Mm-hmm.
why it happened, where's it going, what can you do? Can you use it for something? What can you do with this? Like
Mm-hmm.
just use that curiosity and look at it differently and play with it. And sometimes you may absolutely have to shift or tweak it or reiterate it, make changes, whatever. And then try it again with like a new viewpoint of it. And then just revise it, make it better. That's that whole reiterate, process part of it. That's in a nutshell, that's kind of the process of what that is.
Yeah. And so I've seen in some of your explanation of your formula around this concept of the transformative power of facing emotions and thoughts and this emotional and mental relief. Tell us a bit about sort of that part of your work.
Okay, so for example, whether it's music or words, poetry or songs or little short stories or music, if I have a negative feeling, whatever that is, if I'm disturbed by something or hurt by something or experienced loss, for example, I've had a lot of loss in my life. If I'm dealing with not a happy emotion, the first thing I do is follow this basic formula that I just described, and I just sit with myself and I allow myself to feel that, and I allow it to come out however it comes out in words or music. And, typically what happens for me in my process is it's kind of like therapy.
Mm.
Like when you go to I don't know if you've ever gone to a therapist, but if you go to a therapist and you talk things out, you didn't really come up with a solution, but you sure do feel better when it's done just because you emoted it, just because you expressed it. So sometimes the transformative part for me is just, even if the mood is still whatever, loss, grief, something heavy, even if that emotion itself didn't change in the work, I've created something valuable because I've expressed something
Mhm.
that was in me that is universally experienced. And just by doing that,
Mm.
to me, that's transformative. But I also have experiences where I'll start in a very lower, ugly, uncomfortable, or unpleasant mood. And as I create, my mood itself shifts, and I start to, or the words change, and I start to find meaning, and it shifts into something a little more optimistic, basically. And I've had a lot of that,
Yeah.
just starting out in a dark place and it comes out in a light place. That's the power of creativity. I
Yeah.
think it is self-therapy. Yeah. I
And
hope that answered that question. Like,
yeah, no, absolutely. It's really, I think, sort of a way to process emotions, without necessarily having
definitely.
to talk about it, So whether that's through
Yes.
music or painting or whatever it is, it's a
Yes.
great process, isn't it? And
Yes. And I was going to say on that note, going back to what we were saying earlier, that you use your creative wellness as a process. And I think just by doing that, you're absorbing your feelings about something in your painting process, in your artistic, flow of things. You're just wrestling with your emotions and wrestling with your thoughts. And through that, you're polishing
mm,
your life.
mm,
That's similar to how I do it too. But that, from what I've heard from you,
yeah,
that's kind of part of your practice. Is that right? Does that make
absolutely.
sense?
And what you talked about before with the intention setting, for me, that's the biggest part of that is this concept of soul-led inquiry. So it's those questions, and then once you've asked the question, it's then, and then what? And then what? And it's this sort of
Yes.
one
Deeper,
question
deeper.
after
Yeah.
another. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then that sets you up for a much deeper experience with the actual physical act of, doing whatever it is that you're doing creatively.
Yeah.
Because
And when you say deeper,
Mhm.
some people get put off by that, but I think deeper means deeper into the process, but it's actually lighter in the
Yeah.
effect it has on you. Right. I just want to
Yeah.
make that distinction.
Yeah, that's really quite a good point because I think it's a depth in understanding and connection, which then turns around to then be a lighter experience and an uplifting experience. Yeah, would you agree
Yes.
with that? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 So with this process then, how does it look in your own creative practice? Does it change? You know, do you always follow the same step? Do you adapt it for different situations, or when you've got less time or more time or whatever?
Oh yeah, it'll morph this way and that way, whichever way you want it to go. But like, for example, I'll talk about like songwriting, just so people kind of have a clear picture of how I'm envisioning it. So like for songwriting, I'll set a parameter right up front before I start creating anything. Like I might say, okay, I'm going to write a song that has a verse, a chorus, and a verse, and I'll throw a bridge into it. And then for music speak people, I might say, okay, it's going to be in the key of E flat, and it's going to have 16 bars for the verse and 16 bars for the chorus and 8 bars for the bridge. So I know my exact structure, my form. That's what I say, I get inside your box.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, that's the materials I'm using, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I map that out before I start, so I know exactly what I have to fit into, what my creative stuff has to go into. And then I do that set my intent thing, let go of my head, listen and envision what is it that I want to, what do I feel, what do I want to say, and just envision that whole process and let that my curiosity flow. And then when my ideas come musically or lyrically, I just let them come. I don't judge it. I just let it do it. And regardless of mistakes, I just let it happen. And I just keep going back over and over and over to setting my intent, tapping back into my heart. What do I feel? I mean, it for me, when you say it goes deeper and deeper, that's the part for me that during the creative process, the intent part, I'm constantly revisiting that like over and over again. And I go deeper and deeper with my focus on that because, for one thing, it's really easy to get distracted by that with your inner critic or with rules that about music or whatever it is. And so I just shove that aside and I just keep going back to being in touch with my intent and my heart and what I'm trying to express so that it flows more freely. But then I wanted to say, for example, I've composed music for like indie films, like little rom-coms and horror film even, and I hate horror. I won't even watch a horror movie. But I had to compose music for this horror flick one time, and like I said, I've never even watched it, and I was really kind of beside myself for getting myself into doing this project because it's not the kind of thing I would want to do. This is like the anti-creative for me. Like I would steer away from it. But what I did is that was my inside my box. I've got to fit my music to this picture, to the mood of this character or the mood of this moment. And I just kept tuning in because in this case I had to do it for someone else. So I kept tuning into that intent. And then I just kept narrowing that down to what I felt about that moment and what I felt it would sound like. And I just kept using my imagination to tap into my feeling about it and, whatever the scene was or whatever. And I really, and that was the most grueling experience, by the way, I've ever had. I hated the entire time I was composing that music. It was really uncomfortable. I did not like the sound of it. I didn't like, I actually had because you have to compose the music to the picture, and I would shrink the picture down to it was like an inch, very small on the screen, and I'd stand far away so I couldn't see the real action because I was so, freaked out by the horror stuff in it. But when I was done with that, the point of this was that I really surprised myself with it. I did such a good job. And when I listen to that music, I won't watch the movie part, but when I listen to my music, it is some of the most beautiful, rich, like emotionally dense music I have ever composed. And it was so outside my norm.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making is, yeah, I use that formula, but sometimes, doing something completely outside the regular is something that will tap that creativity as well.
I think from my own experience, one of the things that I encourage is kind of don't be afraid of changing halfway through. So like if you start off with a certain, intention or idea or what have you, what quite often happens is it sort of morphs into something completely different as you go along the journey.
Yes.
Do you agree with that sentiment? Yeah, it's kind of the
Yes,
same.
and it's so funny because I was just having dinner. I'm a caregiver for my 84-year-old mother, and she's a beautiful, well-trained painting artist. I have paintings of hers all around me, and she did galleries and stuff and art guilds and things when I was a teenager. And she's done like a lot of different types of things. And I was just, telling her I was about to talk with you about this. And I asked her, when you tell me about your creative process, when you were looking at a painting in those days, or last time you painted, um, what was your creative process? And she said, I would just, sometimes she had commissions, so she had to do what like I had to do, for the horror thing, do what they wanted. But sometimes she said, I would just sit and look at a canvas blank, and and that's it. And I said, well, describe that. What were you thinking? She said, well, that's just it. I wasn't thinking. She said, I would just sit and let an image come to me. And then once the image came to me, she said, I would start painting that image. And then interestingly, sometimes halfway through the painting, it would completely change to something radically different. That's exactly what you were saying. It's interesting.
Trust the process, I think, because
Yeah.
there's a bit of beauty in that too. Because if you trust yourself enough, then it will actually take you down the right path. Yeah.
Yes. I think that's that key, that being creative is learning to trust your own voice, regardless of how weird or awkward it might be at the moment. Just trust it and go there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what do you believe then is the secret to stronger creative confidence and empowerment for people?
I think that's about working that muscle, you know, showing up, doing the work, creating like you do, creating a daily habit, even if it's small, to consistently put yourself in that seat. And by getting there regularly, even if you don't feel inspired or you don't feel like your work is going well, by being there consistently, you're working the muscle. And also by just being there and creating that kind of ritual with yourself, the muse will meet you there. But if you don't put yourself there, then you don't have the opportunity to meet the muse there. And that's where a lot of, like we were going back earlier, we were talking about how people kind of shut themselves off from being creative. They think it's non-essential, and yet they don't feel fulfilled. They don't feel happy. And art is a real opening door to experiencing those joyful feelings. So I think it's important that you allow yourself to be there as a regular habit and be ready for the creativity. And the more you do that, the more you're able to practice. It is a practice, I think, to be able to practice listening to yourself, listening to your own intent authentically. You'll start to attune to it the more you allow yourself to be in that place. And then that confidence grows over time and experience through just putting yourself in the seat, doing that daily thing, basically. That's why I think you grow that
And
confidence.
how would you say that your entrepreneurial journey has sort of fed your creativity in a different way? Have you replaced some of that creative yearning that you've had in the past into a business-related format?
Yeah, that is interesting. I interviewed a piano educator the other day, and he made it because he does similar things, content creation, and a different topic, and he described it, and it perfectly described what you're saying. He said it's just a whole different musical instrument, isn't it? He didn't say musical. He said it's a whole different instrument. And excuse me, I have kind of a love-hate relationship with the entrepreneurial journey, and that is because it is grueling. There are so many moving pieces. We were talking about it earlier, before we recorded. There are so many balls in the air as an entrepreneur, especially a solo entrepreneur. And learning all the technology and all the back end stuff, and all the pieces of content that you have to create, whether it's video or podcasting or email or social media graphic or text or whatever. And definitely I've tapped into my visual creative skills with designs, and I do a lot of nature photography, so I see that. But the hate part is that it's so exhaustive and it's nonstop, and there's so many balls in the air. And I find that the entrepreneurial part of being creative with fresh ideas and how I can encourage people with my topics and things, though I enjoy it very much. I have to, it's so much to do that I have to constantly work on my creative self care, like pull myself back, give myself the downtime, give myself the silence,
Mm.
give myself the no screens,
Yeah.
as a way of balancing that out. I don't know if that answered kind of
Yeah.
the
Really,
question, but
I think it
yeah.
does take a lot of your creative energy away if you let it.
Does.
And it's this thing of having a cutoff point so that you can make sure that you're still feeding what truly matters to you creatively, because it just goes on and on and on. There's never an end.
Yeah, and I think that speaking of, you just gave me an inspiration right there because sometimes there is so much to do and can become a drudgery because of how much we have to do. But I think what I'm learning through the being a digital, content creator, being a podcaster, a speaker, getting in front of people all the time, it's teaching me again through that process to listen, go deeper to myself and listen to my audience and how I can connect those two things. And
Mm.
I think it's opening a new, like you said, it's a new instrument. It's like a new window into a different art form. And I think what's hard about it is it's awkward for me because it's not my favorite thing to do, versus writing or poetry or piano. But I think that through the process, I'm not sure how to say it, but I feel like the more we do this, the more we work the muscle,
Yeah.
and like I said earlier, and we'll get better at it and we'll
Yeah.
start to tune in to deeper ways that we can connect with that creative voice inside us.
Well,
Went right out the
it's
window.
like you're starting at the beginning again, isn't it? There's so much to learn. It's applying that
Yes.
mindset again. You have to accept that actually creatively you're not where you want to be. And it's really
Yes.
quite hard as a creative person, to accept that, because
Yes.
you've
Have
been
some
on that
skills
journey
elsewhere.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what I was going to say that you just made me remember is that by doing, just like I talked about earlier, doing that horror movie music, and by doing these entrepreneurial type tasks that aren't really in our specific main artistic outlet, it's literally research has, I mean, I listen to a lot of stuff and read a lot of stuff on entrepreneurship and creativity. And literally by doing these things that are harder for us to do, that are outside our norm, we are actually sparking more creativity, neurologically speaking, like it's opening up our brains. And in the moment when you're doing stuff, the drudgery and the exhaustiveness of it and the overwhelm of it, you don't necessarily appreciate that fact. But that's why I have, yes, it's uncomfortable and it's exhausting,
Mm.
because there's so much to do. But when I, again, go back to balancing out the wellness, giving myself the silence, giving myself the space, getting away from screens after I've done a lot of that, it does refresh my creativity in many ways. So it's just a constant practice of taking care of ourselves, basically, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so true.
Yeah.
Jenny Leigh has a new book out, Kaleidescope of the Heart, which is a collection of poetry and lyrics. Jenny Leigh, tell us about how this book came to be.
Okay, so basically, this is a collection of poems and lyrics that I wrote over many years. And through the years, I would put together maybe 20 to 40 pages worth of poems or lyrics I'd written, over that period of my life. And I'd create little chapbooks for friends and family as just personal gifts. But I hadn't done that in many years. And I moved up here about 7 years ago to be a live-in caregiver after my father passed for my mother. Excuse me. And I've been through a lot of stuff since I've been up here personally. A lot of changes, a lot of transformations. Still in the middle of some of it. And one of my friends, she just was always there for me and always encouraging me through all of this stuff. And so I decided that I would put together a collection of my poems and lyrics as a thank you to her for a holiday gift. Just I thought, I didn't want to just do a store-bought something to say thank you, because she really is like a lifeline for me. And so as I started the process of like picking which ones I would give her, I started to realize, holy cow, I have written a lot of poems and lyrics. And I thought, you know what? First of all, it's hard for me to pin it down. Which ones am I going to give her? I've got to go through all of this and then narrow it down, pick it out. And then by the time I got done, I realized, you know what? I'm going to make a book out of this. She basically inspired me to value, my own poetic voice. And I decided I'm going to put it together and publish it myself. And so didn't know what I was getting into when I decided to do that, but it was a lot of work to do all that and getting all the, formatting and yada yada. And now I've just launched this book June 4 on Amazon. So if you're interested in it, you can go, I'll tell you about where you can find it later, but that's the gist of it basically. And so I gave her the first copy of it as a thank you.
So beautiful. And I believe that you've got a poem today that you can share with us. That would be really great.
And I picked this poem, sorry for my allergies, because I noticed your podcast, directed to soul-led creative women. And from what I've heard of your podcast, I think it resonates so much with what I do, with your creative chord and as a creator. But I chose actually I didn't choose this poem chose me because I thought, okay, she would like me to share a poem. So I just randomly opened this book and this is the poem that it came to. And it's on page 52 and it's called My Perfection. And I picked it because to me, it really does represent how women limit themselves and your mission to help them open up to unlimited creativity and how to find that. So I just think it's so relevant. So I'm going to read it. Here it goes. My perfection. I don't have to do it all today. My perfect home, my masterpiece, my ideal marriage to my soulmate, my complete and total fitness, my work plans laid out in advance, my 100% victory in finance. Everything does not have to be perfect now. My elevated status, my enlightenment, my complete transformation in my personal development, my overwhelming ability to handle everything with charm. If I don't make it happen in this moment, it won't set off any alarm. Everything does not have to be superior in my proper orderly way. No pressing need for ducks in a row, no deadline looming for ultimate accomplishment. No penalty waits for not moving at ultra-high speed. No sky will fall, no death to us all, no horrible stop to our spinning planet. No, my perfection is not crucial for life as we know it. Tell my voice, inside my head, I can relax and go to bed. Tell my heart that's pumping steam, I can fulfill my lifelong dream in tiny steps, in bits of time, in increments. It's not a crime to give me a bit of breathing space, to stretch or float, to rest my case, to take it easy on myself, leave stuff sitting on a shelf. Just for a moment to take things in, get back in the groove again. Absorb, enjoy, and experience life. Appreciate what I've got inside. Let go of crazy expectations. Allow all kinds of fluctuations as only colors on my canvas, painting all my dramas mammoth, rolling over obstacles and detours with lines and strokes to open new doors for exploration to truly define my journey as myself divine.
Beautiful. So lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for letting me.
Yeah. It actually, one of the things that popped into my mind was something that I was mulling on the other day, which was my daughter and her journey with learning the guitar. So she's 12 and she's been learning guitar for 4 years. And when she started, she was terrible. But then now she can actually sort of, getting a bit better. She can sort of play some tunes. And it amazes me because she only does like 30 minutes a week. That's it. And a bit of practice, if she can get to it because, kids. But yeah, it's amazing what you can achieve in such a short space of time.
Yes, yes. It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because as you know, I practice piano and I teach people about I've taught people for many years and I'm teaching people about how to improve your piano. And what we said earlier about a creative practice, it's important to do it daily, even if you're only doing a few minutes of it. And I actually heard research proves that even 1 minute doing something on a regular basis makes that an impact on something. Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. I mean, I'd say she probably does an average of about, I don't know, it must be an hour a week, I guess, with all the practice and stuff.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's, it's not a huge amount of time. If you think I'm going to set out to learn something, an hour a week doesn't seem like very much at all, does it? So it
But it's
is
a habit
amazing.
and it accumulates.
Mm,
That's the key right there. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's programming, isn't it? So it's muscle memory and
Yes, exactly.
mental memory and
Yes.
intuition all come into play. So yeah, beautiful.
Yes. Yes.
So what does your own self-care wellness routine look like then? We've talked a lot about creative practice, but what does your self-care practice look like?
Yeah. So it's always a work in progress, like I was saying. I'm constantly working on guarding my night routine. I'm an early riser and early to bed and early riser kind of person. I do a morning walk at sunrise every morning as much as I can or as often as I can. And I always do morning prayer and I do some journaling in the morning. These are kind of like nothing will get in the way of those things. And then I'll eat meals on our patio. We've got birds and bunnies out here and a nice greenery and our plants out there just to get fresh air. And I do frequent nature excursions, walks in parks, a lot of nature as much as I can. And I'm trying to give myself, as I talked about earlier, more moments of rest and getting away from screens after a certain time of day, especially after an intense period of creative output. I try to dial it back like a whole lot. And it's hard for me to dial it back. So I'm not one that just relaxes easily. So I have to consciously work on my creative self-care. And I do things like, nourishing my creativity with reading, journaling daily, like I said, practicing piano regularly, yoga, listening to music and just being still with that, listening to things like your podcast that
Mhm,
align with my interests that help me feel connected to my, artist heart.
mhm,
And then I constantly practice against set boundaries against toxic behaviors and overwork. It's very challenging because I am an HOA board president in addition to all of this as a caregiver and author, poets, all the business stuff that we talked about. So I'm always aiming for a steady daily rhythm and more rest and kind of calming myself down. That doesn't come easily to me. And, relaxing and shutting it off. I'm a very person with a lot of drive, a lot of energy, and a lot of brain work going on. So for me to nourish my creativity, it takes a proactive effort for me to like, you have to have a night routine, you have to have a morning routine. Those are the things. And you've got to practice piano because that's a creative outlet. And the journaling, the writing, that's a creative outlet. And just listening to other people, other artists and musicians and books and things, because I think getting new ideas from other people is just really nourishing for all of that. Yeah.
and
What do
affirm
you do?
and affirming too, don't you find? It's
Oh,
affirming to hear
definitely.
someone repeating it in different language, maybe.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
What
no, I
before
could get better at mine.
yeah, we
I
all
could,
can, I think.
yeah. What I'm
Mhm.
learning though as I age is that trusting or
Yeah.
tuning into what I need right now is really important. So it might look different on different days. I think I used to always
Yeah.
feel like if I didn't have a routine where I was doing the same thing every day, then I wasn't doing it properly. But I've
Right.
come to sort of,
Inner critic.
yeah, I've come to just actually sometimes it might look very different to another
Yeah.
day. But yeah, the nature thing's huge for me. I really do believe in the power of, nature, huge. Obviously, my painting
Yes.
practice, but sometimes, I don't have time for like long sessions, which,
Right. Right.
I can crave.
Yeah.
Get busy, and I guess it's kind of this whole, whatever feels good on the day, like I was thinking even just simple acts like, I made sourdough pancakes for me and my daughter the other day, and I've gone to the effort of like putting it in the fridge the night before.
Nice. Yeah.
That's a nice thing to
Yeah.
do. Or having a
Yeah.
bath just in the middle of the day because
Yeah.
my feet were cold,
Yeah.
silly things like that.
It's so hot here, so it's hard for me to
Oh,
imagine,
okay.
right? Yeah.
We're on
Yeah.
the opposite end of the seasons, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Mm.
I think you brought up such a good point that, you know, I interviewed a guy who teaches creativity in design to students at the local University of Kentucky a while back on my podcast. And he talked about, because I tried to, nail him down on, how does wellness and self care impact creators and creativity? And he brought up the point that, a lot of the themes and things that we've talked about, definitely professional, highly skilled creatives who make a living from it use a lot of these things. But there are an awful lot of creators, creativity experts or whatever, who once, and I'm totally guilty of it, and I'm sure you are, once they get into a project, they just immerse
Yeah.
themselves in that project and they don't come up for like air for like days or weeks or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And he said, so sometimes creativity takes over
Yes.
the creator when you get in the zone like that. Yeah, you totally relate to that, right?
I really can relate to that. I think there's a natural ebb and flow to it. But
Yes.
sometimes when you're really on, it's just the only thing you want to do,
Yes. It's
and
almost like you're driven beyond whether you want to or not.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
just gonna do
you
it.
can't help it. It's like a read something. I know. But then,
Yeah.
you can have periods where you don't do as much, which I think is fine. I think as long as it's
Yes.
there waiting for you and you're in touch with it, I think it's fine. You don't have to have, a certain amount of hours ticked off every week,
Right.
you know?
Right. Right. And I think at least for me, it's important to know after a lot of creative output, it's absolutely natural to have an ebb and flow, meaning just sit back, take your bath in the middle of the day,
Yeah.
go lay down and take a nap,
Yeah.
Go sit and daydream, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to just give ourselves, like you were just saying earlier, that sometimes your day, your creative practice would maybe change in different seasons or different times. I think that's normal for artists in general, people that are really in touch with that. I think it's normal. And I think it's okay to embrace that and not feel. I'm like you. I still think a daily habit is, at least for me, in terms of my piano and my writing, I go there every day.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I do a 2 and 3 hour session with everything regularly.
Yeah.
But as long as I get there and just keep that muscle working a little bit,
Yeah.
I think that's okay. I think the problem is when, and I've done this myself, when I think that like you were saying, I have to do this amount of time to this degree every single, no, you listen to your voice, trust your voice, right?
So important. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes I have paintings sitting there for months, that just don't, they wait patiently for me to come back. And I do, but it's this whole concept of just tapping into it on a daily basis, even if that looks like reorganizing or reflecting on previous work, sitting with it and
Yeah. Cleaning your space or
Yeah.
changing your template or whatever.
all of
Yeah.
those things are part of it too. So
Yeah. 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 I agree. 100%. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, so for all the women out there who are maybe seeking greater access to their creative flow and this concept of creative empowerment, what critical questions would you have them ask themselves today?
That's such a deep question. So I would ask yourself what you need to feel creative and empowered. Ask yourself. And I think for some that might be like more interaction with other people or other art forms. Other people might relish solitude and quiet. Do you need to see or hear or touch creative works by other people, or do you need just to chill, and go out in nature and, whatever? Do you need a break or whatever? Do you need to physically move, or be around people? I think you have to ask yourself, what do I need to be creative and what do I need to feel empowered creatively? And then ask yourself how you feel about your creativity, because that might lead to that answer, too. And then once you hear yourself, then you just listen to your wisdom to get there. basically.
Follow
It's a
the
matter of sitting still with ourselves, and that back to that intent, I think. I think it's so critical, and I think this is a key to being a fulfilled artist and to be anybody who wants to be creative. I think that the key, at least for myself and from what I've seen, the people I've taught and artists and musicians, composers that I've worked with or known, the key is to sit still with yourself and get to know yourself and get in touch with your feelings. That's what creative practice does.
Mm.
So very valuable. And that's the way to answer that question, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, experimentation ultimately. Yeah, following
Yeah.
that curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
creative curiosity feeds more creative curiosity.
Yes. Yes. It's like an addiction once it gets started,
Yeah, that's it.
but a good one.
So how can people get to know you a bit better, Jenny Leigh, and get a feel for the work that you're doing?
Thank you so much. First of all, this has been riveting conversation. It's like my bedtime story waking me up. And really enjoy it. I'm really looking forward to going back and listening to it because I know it's going to fuel more creative sparks as you listen. Like you say, when we listen to other people that have, that are in touch with creative flow, it's very nourishing for your soul. So thank you for the work you're doing and for featuring me in this conversation with you. It's been, educational, enlightening, and I'm really looking forward to listening to it when I'm awake.
Yeah, so welcome.
I'm winding down. But I have people can ride the current, the creative currents with me if they go to yourcreativecord.com/get inspired here. And they can listen to the podcast at the same yourcreativecord.com/podcast. And my podcast I probably will be having Sam Horton on the show sometime very soon. But different kinds of creators, piano people, positivity, wellness, artists, all kinds of different creative type people. But that is the podcast. And then if you enjoyed the poem and you want to learn more, I have all kinds of poems in here, from epic poems to very short form poems, things about nature, relationships, loss, love, life, beauty, joy, self-empowerment, resilience. It just runs the gamut, which is why the name is Kaleidescope of the Heart. And you can get the book now. It's out on Amazon. And you can also find it and learn more about it at yourcreativecord.com/books. So thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, it was so lovely chatting to you today, Jenny Leigh. We'll include all of those links in the show notes, so people will be able to access those through the show notes. But I really appreciate you. It was a beautiful conversation we've had today. I really enjoyed it. And it was lovely to meet you for the first time. I hope we're chatting again soon.
We will. And thank you so much for all you do and for having me. It was a pleasure and really made me think, and it's going to make me grow. So I appreciate you so much for that.
Oh, you're so very welcome, Jenny Leigh. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to receive 3 actionable creative wellness tips personalized to your circumstances that you can implement easily straight away, head on over and take my free quiz at samhorton.co/quiz.